Meow. Coming from someone that loves the Alien franchise, it absolutely pains me to have to make this video. The first half of the show was pretty enjoyable and well made with some occasional dumb moments, but the last few episodes dive off a cliff so sharply that I can't ignore how devoid of logic this show is. It genuinely was infuriating. This video will go into spoilers, and I'll do my best to summarize the plot if you haven't watched the show, and you're just here to see how bad things get. So if anyone doesn't know, the base premise is that Weyland-Yutani sent out a research vessel to collect alien specimens for what feels like the 20th time, and that ship crash lands in a separate corporation's part of the world named Prodigy. Since Earth is run by 5 corporations in what's called a corporatocracy, where they've replaced all governments and elected leaders. Hopefully that's not going to be our future. Prodigy themselves are working on what's called hybrids, human minds that are transferred into synthetic bodies, which essentially acts as immortality, assuming you don't die like a brainlet. Prodigy believes that uploading a child's mind is the best fit because their minds are more malleable, and their increased imagination paired with a brain with insane processing power will lead to more genius potential. Now, there's a very glaring issue in regards to importing a child's mind into a synthetic body, and that's you're now giving immense power to a child.
Your breasts, they're weird.
Since you're a synth, that means they have super strength, are very resilient, can't feel pain, don't need to eat or sleep, just briefly recharge, can learn anything crazily fast, and that's really just touching the surface because Wendy, who's the main character, has insane power creep, which is a separate issue I'll get into later, since she's able to start hacking anything she wants to from anywhere. Like, this should genuinely be a major concern, and the fact that this is mostly swept under the rug by what the show classifies as a genius, who's also a multi-trillionaire, is a massive oversight to say the least. The issue here from a writing perspective is that this is inherently the premise and it's flawed to its core DNA. You kind of just have to accept this oversight and go along with the story. And don't worry, because the decision making gets even worse from here. Like, the biggest thing is Wendy's older brother, when she used to be human, is one of the first responders to the spaceship crash. His name is Joe. Wendy insists on going to save him and help out in this disaster, and obviously anyone would be apprehensive to send someone who's mentally a child into this situation. But there is a lot of nuance here in which you don't want Wendy to feel like a prisoner. So Boy Cavalier lets her go for the justification of collecting scientific data. I can understand sending her, however, sending all the other children as well is just asking for chaos. Hey guys, you want to go to a mass casualty event with mutilated bodies everywhere? I just want to play Roblox today.
They're still in the prototype stage. The loss of a single unit would be devastating.
Yeah, so don't lose one.
This reasoning from Boy Cavalier is also especially puzzling since it's revealed later on in episode 5 that he orchestrated this event, paying someone to crash the ship into his territory so he could collect the alien specimens. This isn't a case anymore of, oh, he thought this was just a normal disaster. He knows there'll be aliens there. These kids are by no means mentally equipped to deal with something this potentially traumatizing. That's a massive point of conflict for the character Nibs, who essentially snaps after a wholesome encounter with the eye octopus. And this is also ignoring 2 other issues like the possibility of the building flat out collapsing at any moment, and Kirsch, the synth scientist played by the sexy Timothy Oliphant.
Me.
Okay, you know what? No.
Is assigned to be the only chaperone for these 7 misbehaving hybrids, which, you guessed it, leads to more easily avoidable conflict. Oversight stacked upon oversights. So this raises questions like, why couldn't they send normal synths into this disaster? Boy Cavalier should be ready for this event. Doesn't this trillionaire have more synths on hand? Are they that absurdly expensive to produce? If so, that's kind of contradicted by him making one with a box of scraps when he was 6 years old. Boy Cavalier only has a couple synths throughout the show, besides the hybrids, which I find really surprising for a supposed multi-trillionaire. I'm bringing up these questions because why potentially compromise your hybrids that act as crucial advancement in the arms race of immortality, and also fulfills the boy genius's personal goal of wanting to converse with someone smarter than himself?
I'll finally be able to have an interesting fucking conversation.
You can still most likely procure these specimens without the hybrids. So yeah, that's the flawed nature of this entire plan for the first half of the show, and I'm normally fine with accepting some questionable aspects if the show doesn't keep getting progressively worse. Moving on, I'll tackle some devoid of logic highlights during this disaster to quickly move through the first few episodes. One of them is Joe, while in the building that the spaceship crashed into, finds a weird dress-up rich party that I guess doesn't know a spaceship crashed into the building. For how serious the show is, this could just be a tongue-in-cheek joke about rich people being dumb, but it is still absolutely absurd no one noticing the building shaking as if a devastating earthquake just hit it, essentially throwing out logic for the sake of humor. Before this, Joe also got chased by the alien and ran into an elevator, and the door closed literally within a second. It closes so fast to the point that this elevator would probably dismember someone. I guess elevators in the future are like this apparently, besides this one later in the season that closes normally. So the plot armor gas leak is starting to grow. One point that's more or less a nitpick is how pristine the interior of the ship is after crashing. Not necessarily in terms of structural integrity, but most props and objects are still perfectly placed as if the ship didn't just crash land. After arriving at the crash site, Wendy is able to hear the specific frequency at which the xenomorph race communicates in, since if you didn't know, they can do that. I specifically remember this from the Aliens vs Predator game, which is a pretty big deep cut that may buy me some clout. The questionable aspect here though is why can't the other hybrids hear the noise, given that they're made from the same metaphorical cloth? This basically places really big plot importance on Wendy for later on in the show, when it should be a skill that everyone naturally has.
I think they picked me.
This evaluation doesn't make sense because I don't know how they can pick her without even knowing she exists yet. To rapid fire through a few interesting writing moments, Joe gets saved at the last second from the escaped xenomorph, increasing the thickness of his plot armor vest. Isaac, one of the hybrid children, puts his face right up against a potentially hostile alien, which seems kind of crazy to me that this kid isn't more scared in this situation. But I guess you can rationalize it with him thinking he's invulnerable. Pepe level, no. Wendy and Slightly come upon a room full of mutilated corpses and limbs everywhere, and have the most shockingly mute reaction to this. You're mentally children. This should be scarring for you. I would be terrified and I'm 25. The show feels so inconsistent in how they portray the mental age and maturity of these children. After this, Wendy reunites with her brother and they go deeper into the ship to secure the facehugger eggs. In this scene, it's pretty inconsistent in terms of when an egg hatches, because later on in the show, they clarify that if there's a normal human within proximity to an egg, it'll release a facehugger as it detects biological life. However, in this scene, they don't, and Joe gets very close to one, even putting his face right up against it. At the end of the episode, Joe gets kidnapped by the xenomorph and Wendy opts to go after him to save him. At first I thought this alien was taking him away to incubate him, as that's generally the main motive for why xenomorphs don't immediately kill people, but it turns out that it was using him as bait. Which, with that revelation, that makes this moment not really make sense anymore. This xenomorph doesn't know that these characters are close, so I don't see the need to use him as bait, especially since it's been decimating everyone it's been encountering. Realistically, the alien in this situation would probably just impale Joe and then fight Wendy and Slightly, thus defending the eggs, which are the primary source of procreation for their species. Xenomorphs do have intelligence though, so maybe it doesn't want to engage two synthetic beings in combat at the same time, but I don't feel like it has sufficient information to make that call, along with potentially compromising the eggs. So yet again, somehow Joe survives, pushing his imaginary death counter to 3 despite us only being 2 episodes into the show. Unfortunately, Joe dies from getting impaled, tragically ending his death counter joke too early. Nah, he's fine. 'Tis but a flesh wound. Thankfully, the alien decides to Ara farm and build up Joe's juicy fear levels just enough to the point that Wendy has enough time to stop the alien. Kind of weird that this is the second time this has happened. Which, if you think about this moment, wouldn't the alien hear Wendy running towards it with pliers? With how hyper-aware xenomorphs are, I find it laughable that Wendy can just approach the xenomorph in a critical state without it realizing. Then she starts dragging it towards this loading bay to trap it inside, and another aspect here that nerfs the xenomorph is that it could easily strike Wendy in this position with its tail. She's literally standing 1 foot in front of it. According to most sources, a xenomorph's tail is about 5 meters long or 16 feet. So yeah, I call bullshit on this moment, and she would also get impaled. Wendy traps the xenomorph in the loading bay and is also locked in with it. When Joe opens the door, we find out that Wendy was able to decapitate the xenomorph with what essentially seems like a kitchen knife. Now, that definitely seems implausible and would probably be like trying to cut a steak with a butter knife, but with her vague super strength, it could be possible. And the bigger issue here is how much the creators have dismantled the terrifying and horror icon that is the xenomorph. If Wendy can just decapitate a xeno with a small knife in under 10 seconds, then how is there going to be any meaningful suspense in this series moving forward for our main character? Something to ponder on throughout the rest of the video. Slightly and Smee watch over the alien eggs until they're confronted by Morrow, the best character in the show hands down, no sarcasm included. He's a Yutani loyalist and was the security officer on the spaceship. His primary motivation is getting these alien specimens to Yutani. In this scene, the confusing aspect is why the eggs don't open up for Morrow. He is technically a cyborg, and from what we see he has some augmentations, but the show later establishes that you can grow a xenomorph from a singular organ. So since Morrow is still partially biological, it seems contrived from a writing perspective for the eggs to not hatch during this long 5-minute dialogue scene. And even if you think I'm wrong in this regard, well, too bad, because one of the eggs at the very end of the scene hatches anyways. This overall mechanic is really inconsistently enforced because in some scenes they hatch immediately, while in other scenes, like in this one, the writers conveniently don't let them hatch for a long time. Also, before the scene ends, Morrow plants a device on Slightly in which he can communicate with him. This spawns a rather flawed subplot that I'll get into now because once everyone goes back to Prodigy Island with the alien specimens, the devoid of logic aspects cool down for a bit. Morrow starts a plan in which he tries to manipulate Slightly into smuggling out a xenomorph which he will then collect. There's a lot of nuance surrounding this, like kids possibly being susceptible to this, but children still fundamentally have some reasoning. Like at a baseline, most kids know not to interact with strangers, let alone clearly dangerous people who have threatened them recently with a gun. That's why I kind of refuse to believe that Slightly would realistically fall for this friend bullshit. It's as if Noah Hawley is assuming that all kids are susceptible idiots, when in reality, that really only applies to like really young children, generally younger than 8 years old.
If you don't stop screwing around back there, this is what I'm gonna do with you.
In this show, though, these are essentially preteens, around the ages of 11 to 12, as established in episode 2.
I'm 11, and Wendy just turned 12. Slightly.
They should be able to distinguish between good and bad people by this point. As a frame of reference, when you're that age, you're in middle school already, and these are hybrids with faster brains, they're being trained by professionals, and they're already functioning within a mindset that they think they're adults because they're in adult bodies. So theoretically, their mental age should be higher, or at the very least, their intelligence. There's also the complicated factor of all kids are different, some are more or less mature at certain ages, along with Morrow being really good at psychologically manipulating Slightly, showing off his intellect. It's just questionable whether Slightly would even engage in this dialogue in the first place. So as you would guess, the subplot leads to a point where Yutani tries to steal back their specimens, which we'll address later. Going into the ending of episode 4, this is truly where the show starts going down a controversial path where Wendy is able to mimic the sound she's heard from the xenomorphs, given that her voice is basically a speaker. So that means she's able to tame the baby xenomorph, and she becomes a surrogate mother. Nothing necessarily devoid of logic yet, and this is plausible, but things get pretty shaky later on. Episode 5 is a flashback of how the aliens got loose on the spaceship and why it crashed. Nothing is really wrong here, and if anything, this episode is a great example of incompetence done right. Characters confidently make bad decisions, and those make sense from their perspectives. They're blunders. That's the main distinguishing aspect from it just being bad writing in which characters betray their inherent motivations or act out of character for the sake of forcing the narrative in a certain direction. So with that said, let's move on to episode 6, and from here, the fireworks really start to pop. Nibs, the character who almost got possessed by the eye octopus that I'll name Dave from here on out, is still very traumatized and essentially snaps. Like, she's fully gone mentally and even thinks she's pregnant.
I'm pregnant.
Boy Cavalier's right-hand man, Adam, insists on erasing her memory to before they went to the spaceship wreck. Right away, anyone would immediately see the dire conflict here in that she'll quickly find out that she's missing some memories, especially since her friends that she'll be conversing with still have those memories, and it's recent enough to the point that they'll talk about them. And guess what? That literally happens later, unsurprisingly. The only way this would possibly work is if they isolated her from everyone else, and even that would have repercussions. The therapist lady Sylvia suggests that this can be solved over time with more therapy, but Adam needs her to be ready for a conference in 3 weeks, which in her current state is not possible. The issue here motivation-wise is that you could easily just pull this hybrid prototype and launch with 5 instead of 6 hybrids. It shouldn't be surprising that one of these experiments fail, and the fact that Adam kicks the can down the road so haphazardly to a point that more conflict will sprout immediately is idiotic. And it's also revealed later that Adam is a synth and he should be able to foresee this practically guaranteed eventuality. Kirsch and Boy Cavalier go to meet with Yutani, so Kirsch gives Isaac the responsibility of running the lab while he's gone. It's set up prior that Dave is highly intelligent, so things will most likely go wrong. Bro. As you just saw, Isaac, I guess, has a hard time in controlling his strength output. So much to the point that he pulls off a metal door, which should require a significant amount of effort. Regardless though, he still has to get the food into the habitat for these aliens and opts to go inside the room to set the tray down. To which, Dave, the brilliant genius he is, headbutts the glass and scares Isaac, knocking him over and locking him in the room. Now, this may be a bit of a nitpick, but it was definitely not required to put his entire body in there. All he had to do was quickly extend his hand holding the tray of food, place it down on the ground, and then close the door. There's no reason to place the tray in the middle of the room, thus increasing the amount of risk in this situation. However, he is a child, so he might not have the best judgment. Because of this flying alien spits acid on him and kills Isaac. Dave for the win. This plot point also indirectly raises another issue. The creators put focus on there being security cameras, and our characters are constantly being monitored and listened to. There's literally a whole segment in which Arthur and Sylvia hide from the cameras to discuss something in private. But when it comes to specific events like Isaac's death, it's baffling that no one notices this. He dies on camera. Does this compound not have a dedicated security guard watching the feeds? They have a ton of soldiers roaming the island in preparation for an attack from Yutani, so surely they have someone in surveillance in general. This makes it feel like barely anyone works here, as if there are only 10 people on staff besides the soldiers roaming around. There aren't more synths that can run the lab? Kirsch is the only one besides the hybrids and Adam has his other duties? I don't know, just seems very forced and doesn't make any sense.
Is my sister safe here?
Don't worry, man, no one's watching the security feed apparently. In this scene, Joe wants to escape the island with Wendy and asks the main IT guy Arthur for help, who has a good moral compass, since prior to this, he just got fired. He tells him the boat access code, along with turning off the trackers within the hybrids. This seems like a good short-term solution, however, I don't see why they can't just turn them back on. At best, they'd get off the island and then wouldn't last a day because they'd get tracked down by the full force of an entire country/continent. So this being offered as a solution to his problems is kind of silly. Unless if this is the only person on the island with computer smarts that can do this, which the show seems to be implying. At the end of this scene, Arthur notices that Isaac's tracker isn't connected and goes to the lab, which was his last location. This is really confusing because the creators are insinuating here that Arthur and Joe are being watched closely by the security camera. We distinctly cut to a POV perspective of someone presumably watching them as the camera zooms in on them. So how the hell does no one notice Isaac's dead fucking body in the lab? It's so unabashedly stupid, and the writers selectively choose when the cameras are imposing and our characters need to be wary of them. Since Arthur is somehow the only person aware of Isaac's condition, and he didn't alert anyone of this potential emergency for some reason, this leads to a contrived plot point in which he happens to be the only person present in the lab, thus giving Slightly an opportunity to release a facehugger onto Arthur. And yet again, the inconsistent nature of the eggs is highlighted in which, seconds after Slightly opens the door containing the eggs, one of them releases a facehugger. Meanwhile, other characters with plot armor go entire scenes with them not so much as reacting. Dave watches with intent. After Slightly takes a mildly sedated Arthur back to his room, Smee barges in and finds his body under Slightly's bed. He coerces Smee into helping him and promises that Arthur definitely won't die. They have to get his body to a specific alcove on the beach where Mara will take the xenomorph back to Yutani. The problem here is they have to carry this body through public spaces that are currently being patrolled by a lot of security guards. So not running into any of them is going to require a significant degree of luck. And this is also entirely ignoring the security cameras that people may or may not be watching. A plausible explanation here, if someone is actually watching the security feed, is that Kerr secretly disabled the cameras for them so they wouldn't immediately get caught, since it's revealed later that Kurtz was letting this plot play out so he could lure Morrow into a trap.
One of the children got careless.
Oh, really? Which one? I'll send him to bed without any supper.
That one.
Oh, bro really needs to hire better security. The fact that so much shit is going on in this lab that he doesn't know about with what he describes as trillions of dollars worth of R&D is insane. There should be a minimum of security guards monitoring people coming in and out of the lab, which is actually funny because they finally post security guards in the last episode. There needs to be proper surveillance, and more people need to actively be present in the lab so they can respond to any emergency around the clock. However, those bare necessities would fundamentally break the story and would not allow all this conflict to explode as conveniently as it has so far. Joe, Wendy, and Nibs decide that the island is no longer safe and opt to make a play for the boats. Prior to that though, Wendy remotely opens the door containing the xenomorph that she's bonded with. This acts as a very evil moment for Wendy that I feel like the show downplays, because they place Wendy on a higher moral standpoint in that she's disgusted these scientists are dissecting and experimenting on these aliens. She doesn't want to be that cruel, and that actively disgusts her. The fact that she's suddenly a-okay with unleashing a deadly monster on what are basically innocent workers just trying to make a living is really jarring character-wise. The brother slightly questions this and it quickly brushes off without them really addressing it yet. You can make an argument that Wendy is detaching herself from the human race, but she still fundamentally has a human mind, one that should be filled with empathy.
Look at her face, her body language. I mean, if I didn't know better, I'd say she was human.
So the fact that she suddenly turns into a sociopath is quite the writing choice. Slightly and Smee miraculously get through the compound carrying Arthur's body without running into anyone. Silly things transpire, like them losing Arthur's body despite him being laid down right next to them, but I don't think that's worth spending time on, and the consequential plot point here is Arthur gets chest bursted too early and the Xenobaby gets away too soon. That'll be very important later. Boy Cavalier moves Dave into his personal room, and Dave, being the Chad he is, knows pie. For this general subplot, there's nothing necessarily devoid of logic about it. I just find it crazy from a writing perspective that there's no real payoff for it this season. It's basically teased to us that Boy K wants to put Dave into a human so that he could talk to it, thus achieving one of his primary goals. But all that happens of consequence in the end is Dave taking over Arthur's corpse on the beach, and that's where the subplot ends. Which is very underwhelming, and I think a lot of people can agree that Dave was one of the best aspects of Alien Earth. Wendy and the gang run into some Yutani soldiers, and she commands her xenomorph to kill everyone. It's one thing that these people aren't able to hit this big creature in broad daylight while it doesn't even move around that quickly, but the bigger issue here is Wendy effortlessly commanding the xenomorph. Keep in mind that it's only been about a few days. The fact that she's able to communicate to this degree to an alien species in an unknown language, while also building a relationship where the xenomorph is 100% loyal to her, is extremely rushed and convenient. I get that she can learn things quickly, but learning French in a day or two is vastly different to this, almost to a comical degree. There's also the aspect of the alien having its own autonomy and intelligence. The fact that there's no resistance in this relationship is flat out unrealistic because teaching intelligent animals, and let alone aliens, should take a long time. Like, Jurassic World is a pretty silly movie, but at the very least, Chris Pratt's character imprints and grows up with his velociraptors over years. Alien Earth accelerates all that growth in days, which is wild. Along with Wendy hanging out with the xenomorph on her off time. She's not even doing this 24/7. This leads the narrative to a point in which you have to very much suspend your disbelief and go along with this problematic direction that the showrunner is insisting on. All the while, it removes so much nuance in terms of what the headspace is like for a xenomorph. To be fair, I'd assume this would end poorly, like the Xeno acting out and doing something Wendy doesn't want, but so far from what we've seen in Season 1, not much really alludes to this. So in essence, Noah Hawley has turned the xenomorph into a vicious house cat, or what they describe as a lion. In other words, the Jurassic Worldification of the Alien franchise. The baby xenomorph that chest-bursted out of Arthur randomly and spontaneously gets captured. I've been railing on the show quite a bit, and this moment I think may be the dumbest. This is a massive island. How do you just chance across what has been characterized as such an elusive species? This thing should be gone. It would very easily hide, kill some minor prey, and then turn into an adult xenomorph. This makes me think that the writers didn't want to have another loose variable wreaking havoc on the island, so they opted to remove it. When in reality, this would be a huge point of conflict.
Within an ecosystem, right, you introduce an apex predator into an ecosystem. What happens? How does the environment shift?
Wendy, Joe, and Nibs approach the dock, and it's eerily empty. For pretty much anyone, this should immediately be a red flag. How are there no guards or anyone present around the primary means of getting off the island? This facility is literally on high alert. At first when I was watching this, I was like, oh, it's just another bafflingly dumb moment where I guess no one is here. They did just randomly find a xenomorph baby in a jungle. Anything can happen at this point. So, unsurprisingly, this was actually a trap, and before getting taken in, Wendy and Nibs start going apeshit. It's a little puzzling in the sense that they had direct orders to take them in without harming them, but simultaneously, seemingly most of them don't have tranquilizing guns. Like, everyone on the docks are being useless and are just watching the hybrids decimate people on the boat, which insinuates they're running lethal rounds. Even this lady pumps Nibs with her handgun. Joe ends up stopping Wendy from summoning the xenomorph, given that he's been pretty disturbed by the fact that Wendy has been mercilessly killing soldiers, and he picks up a gun to tranquilize Nibs. Maybe all the guns can do this, and if that is the case, then I don't know why everyone was standing idly by on the docks picking their noses. Just a weird scene in general. The final episode opens with a very strong scene of Sylvia the therapist visiting the graves of the human children that were transferred into the hybrids. Apparently, I guess she's not aware of the fact that there's a xenomorph on the loose, along with there being intruders on the island. I don't know how she could be shielded from this information. You'd assume at the very least if she tried to leave the compound, some security guards would be like, sorry ma'am, it's not safe outside, you have to go back to your room. To which she hopefully wouldn't endanger herself to visit these graves. This is supposed to be a very smart character, by the way. After being confronted by the xenomorph, she luckily gets saved at the last second by soldiers happening to walk by. So, what was the point of this scene? Why are we compromising the writing so much for practically no reason? This is like the third time a character has been saved right before being killed by a xenomorph, but in this instance, she put herself in a situation that she shouldn't have been in the first place.
You know, and the other thing is when you have a xenomorph, you got to kill some people, and so you need a lot of characters so I can systematically kill them off one at a time. Sorry.
So to inform you on what's going on, the xenomorph is going on a massive kill streak, Yutani is sabotaging the island and is jamming all of their signals, thus cutting them off from the world, and the hybrids are currently in a holding cell. However, it wasn't made to contain them, and they could break out at any moment. In general, everything is falling apart. Adam advises Boy Cavalier that he should evacuate before things most likely and obviously get worse. To which, he doesn't even merit that with a response. For his character, you can argue that he thinks he has a god complex and he's obsessively focusing on Dave too much, but at a fundamental level, Adam telling him that their situation is so dire to the point that his life is in mortal danger should override all of that. Like, rich people in general, when met with that situation, become cowardly. Their default is having so many layers of protection that they're invulnerable. When they're suddenly in danger for once, I feel like it's more in character for him to run away and possibly even take Dave with him. He does eventually try to escape later, but it's too late by that point. It feels like the writers are conveniently having him ignore the realistic option of escape now so that he's artificially stuck in this plot line. And it's not like he's even doing anything of importance. He's just sitting in his room watching the security feed as the entire facility falls into chaos. Quite literally the personification of "this is fine." To add another major oversight to the already massively growing pile of oversights, to subvert this possible eventuality where these hybrids rebel against their creators, since, you know, they have their own minds and free will, I'm surprised Boy Cavalier and co. didn't develop a contingency plan where they can turn off the hybrids remotely. Similar to how Arthur simply turned off their tracking. You have to be pretty naive or just flat out stupid to not anticipate this as a potential possibility. And it's not like this would break the story or anything, because you can still have it to where, as they try to turn off the hybrids, Wendy, given that she's an overpowered wireless hacker, rewrites the code of the hybrids and subverts their shutdown. This solves the problem of the human characters seeming even dumber than they are, while also making the hybrids even smarter by countering their scheme. Wendy, given the hacker god she now suddenly is, remotely opens the door to Joe and Morrow's cell, and from here, Morrow goes to fight Kirsch given their tiny feud from earlier. This scene raises a general questionable aspect of synth power level. Synthetic beings essentially have a form of super strength, so theoretically in a fistfight, Kirsch landing a single blow on Morrow would be devastating, which actually happens where he gets punched in the face. I'm not necessarily a believer of the one-punch knockout trope, but if there was a punch to be lights out for anyone, then this would be it. As a point of reference, Adam, who's also a synth, is able to throw Wendy, who's a hybrid, across an entire room later in the episode. The only argument that would make sense for Morrow is that his entire skeleton is made of vibranium or whatever. And another weird thing in this scene is that the creators kind of forgot about Morrow having a retractable blade in his hand. This should be a weapon that turns the tide for him and gives Morrow a partial advantage over Kirsch. But Morrow ends up winning anyways, and from what I can tell, breaks Kirsch's spine by slamming him into a metal table. From here, we get the classic trope of the villain monologuing to his bested opponent, and in this case, I'm actually fine with it because Kirsch is disabled and Morrow is really romantic with his words. However, the thing that saves Kirsch is that, at the very beginning of this fight, Kirsch shot the glass containing one of the aliens and it breaks loose. During this chaos, Kirsch surprises Morrow and pacifies him. The issue here is that this directly contradicts information that we received prior. This is supposed to be tempered glass. Bullets should not be able to break it at all. Kirsch in that scene was referring to the enclosure for the xenomorph, but I don't know why that wouldn't also apply to the rest of the enclosures. Why would you not use tempered glass for them? I feel like this is just a moment that needs to happen, so the writers hope that the audience forgot about that fact. At least it leads to a pretty cool death later. Boy Cavalier goes to hang out with the hybrids, and Wendy does a Giga Chad power move.
What's the story?
From here, Boy K basically knows he's screwed, and I commend his effort for keeping up his confidence and trying to manipulate the children. His bodyguard, on the other hand, he gets fucking executed. I find it hard to believe that all these kids are suddenly on board with murder. It makes sense for Wendy and especially Nibs, and she's pretty psychotic at this point, but for the others, like Smee and Slightly, they freaked out when Arthur died, showing immense sadness and regret towards his death. The death of an innocent security guard who was just doing his job seems so utterly and suddenly evil for everyone who's allowing this to happen. This would make more sense if it was built up that the security guard was abusive towards the children or something, so there's at least a bit of justification for killing him. I am putting a lot of emphasis on this random NPC, but this completely rushes the major point of development where these characters turn towards a sinister side. The writers flat out haven't been building towards this for at least 3 of these characters, instead opting to have them suddenly be anti-human because Wendy said so. And even Wendy's arc in this regard is incredibly underdeveloped. If you look at a show like Westworld Season 1, the general arc the hosts go on as they endure literal torture and tragedy from humans is 100% justified when they start to turn against their creators. While for Alien Earth, barely anything is done to actually move them down this arc. There's no time for nuance, we're literally running out of episodes. From here, they let Boy Cavalier run away to establish that he's now the lesser species and to scare the living shit out of him. Wendy's xenomorph enters the facility, and this particular moment where it's in a narrow hallway with soldiers shooting at it with guns is quite baffling to say the least. To put it bluntly, the xenomorph should be dead here. Throughout media, it's generally portrayed that given the right weapons and equipment, you can kill xenomorphs. Even more so in video games where you blast them away in droves. The main challenge comes in the limitations of what your characters have access to, along with the fact that they bleed acid, and since most alien movies take place on a spaceship, shooting one basically means that the hull of the ship would be breached, completely wiping everyone out. In Alien Earth though, they obviously don't have to worry about that, everyone has assault rifles, and in this specific situation, it's in a constricted hallway. So the writers acting like the alien is unkillable no matter what in the show seems very contrived, even though Wendy can kill one with a fucking kitchen knife. Have some goddamn consistency. Adam lures Joe into Dave's office in what is probably one of the most head-scratching plans in the show. Adam and Boy K's objective here is to have Dave take over Joe's body. Don't worry, he definitely gave his consent. The crazy aspect about this plan is that they just let Dave out of his locked container to await to pounce on Joe. Let me repeat that. Dave is out of his cage. Do they not expect Dave to potentially find a way out of this unsecure room? At the end of this scene after the fight and struggle, Dave finds a way out. I don't know why they didn't pacify Joe first and quickly stuff his body inside the container with Dave or something. Ideally in a bigger one, but the current plan is so extremely reckless that at this point, I assume Boy K is ironically one of the dumbest characters in the show. Wendy arrives in time to save Joe. How many times has this happened already? I've lost count. Adam intervenes, and during their fight, Wendy freezes Adam in place, revealing that she can now control Sims. The power creep for Wendy has gotten so out of hand at this point that I wouldn't be surprised if she declared world domination in the beginning of season 2. We thought the aliens would be what potentially ends the world in the Alien Earth show, but it turns out it'll be the hybrids most likely. Wendy can just infiltrate any electronic mainframe and hack everything in a building through monitors and cameras. This would be very problematic for Weyland-Yutani since they manufacture a lot of robots. The conundrum here writing-wise is Wendy is way too overpowered now. Not much can really stop her, and her power has so much potential that it's basically limitless. In every scene she's gaining a new skill, and at her current rate, she's going to be an omnipotent god within a few episodes. Which I guess is the point of the show, in that Wendy is pivoting to become the main villain, even though she's still framed as the protagonist currently. The only potential weakness for her is that she still cares for her brother, so that can possibly be used as leverage. I guess that explains why he's had such unimpenetrable plot armor throughout the show.
You want to know why I like them? The aliens. They're honest.
Huh? From here, Wendy and the other hybrids round up all the characters and lock them into the same cell, and this is where season 1 ends. Things are quite unresolved, one could say. And I'm sure all of you will still care about the show when season 2 comes out in 2 to 3 years. That's why ending it in this manner feels like you're robbing the audience of any satisfaction. And we don't even know if season 2 is greenlit yet. Dave will perpetually be stuck in a zombie Arthur as he mucks about in a forest for the rest of time. So yeah, thanks for watching the whole video, and if you like this series, then make sure to check out my Devoid of Logic playlist that'll be in the end screen. My Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description, and have a good day. Thanks to my top patron, Logan Farmer, for being an amazing longtime supporter of this channel.